Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our today's virtual talk entitled Conservation Challenges in Kenya. My name is Richard Kipngeno. I work here at Nature Kenya as the Birding and Membership Officer, and I will be the moderator of our today's virtual talk that will be presented by Mr. Paul Gacheru, who is our Species and Sites Conservation Manager here at Nature Kenya. So I would just like to let you know that this presentation is on record, and we will be uploading it in our Nature Kenya YouTube channel later on after the presentation, and you'll be free to revisit later. And I will also request all the participants that we remain muted so that we give our speaker ample time to present. And if you have any question, feel free to share it through the chat box, and we will strive our level best to sample all of them after the speaker is done with his presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome on stage our today's speaker, Mr. Paul Gacheru, our Species and Site Conservation Manager here at Nature Kenya, as he delves on this case of two endemic bird species in Kenya. Who are these species? Mr. Gacheru, welcome on stage.
Thank you, Richard. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. So thank you for having me, and welcome everyone to this talk on conservation challenges and responses in Kenya. I'll be looking at two species, which you'll be getting to understand them as we go along. And I hope this talk will be informative to guide your work or information sharing and creating synergies and collaborations for ensuring that we have sustainable conservation and development in our country. So let me kick off the presentation. So our work at Nature Kenya, part of the work that I lead here as a conservation species and sites program manager, is informing based on science which informs our conservation priorities and action, and mainly looking at how best we can empower people to be able to promote conservation within our country, linking up with issues to do with livelihoods, and as well as working closely with government to advocate for sound governance and planning for a sustainable future here in the country. So that's the work that I do and support. And these two species that I'll be talking about are helping us towards achieving these objectives. So I thought it would be good for people who are not scientists or people who have not and who don't understand what endemism or endemic species is. I thought I show you this and tell you what endemic species are. And basically, in a layman's language, is just species that are found in a specific area and nowhere else in the world. And therefore, due to that characteristics and their distribution, they face significant challenges that make them even increase level of threat and level of extinction for these species across the world. So in Kenya, on birds, we have around 10 species that are endemic to Kenya, and these are the Clark's weaver, the Taita pallis, the Taita thrush, Sharp's longclaw, which is found in the Kinango Plateau, Hyde's bubbler, which is found within the dryland areas and the river valleys around Mokoraine, Mount Kenya, moving down towards Kitui. And I'm glad to hear colleagues from Kakuzi who are here, who host some populations of Hyde's bubbler within their land, Kulal white-eye, Williams lark, which is found within the Samburu landscape, and Kikui white-eye, and brown and white barbet. So those are part of the endemic species of birds, which are found in Kenya, and therefore within the areas that they are located, you find that they face a myriad of different challenges that we work towards addressing. So our overall strategy is aimed at saving the species and promoting, helping to promote the environment that they live and as well as sustaining the local people that live within these landscapes that these species are found in. So that's overall strategy that we are working towards and guiding our principles of conservation work here as in Nature Kenya. So in the Taita Hills, where one of the species is located, we find the Taita Hills is quite unique of a habitat, and it's a site which is already designated as a key biodiversity area and has quite a number of other species that are threatened and also endemic within the landscape. Around 13 plant species, we have mammals, we have 2 reptiles, 3 amphibians, a number of butterflies, as well as a range of very rare plants that are found within that landscape. And as a result of that, to be able to guide our work within that landscape, Nature Kenya have been focusing within that IBA, which is highly fragmented, and only around 2% of the forest area remains to date. And it's a northernmost part of what you're calling the Eastern Arc Mountains, which extends from Tanzania through to Kenya, with Taita being the northernmost extent. And this area has around 3 forest patches, which are now highly fragmented and separated by human habitation, therefore providing a very unique scenario for conservation initiatives within that landscape. And within this landscape, the first species that I'll be talking about is the Taita pallis, which is one of very rare bird in Kenya, with around 150 to 200 individuals being recorded remaining in the wild. And this species, which is critically endangered, is only restricted within the Taita Hills forests and only documented currently within 3 forest fragments within that landscape. It has been estimated or have been documented to have gone extinct in some other landscapes, in some other forests within forest fragments within Taita. So among the 13 forest fragments, we have 8 only occurring within 3 forest fragments. So the 10 forest fragments does not have this species at current. So the work that we have been informed by different demographic studies and informed by different scientists across in Kenya, and as well as mapping vegetation territories, mapping vegetation characteristics and suitability for these species. So what research has been able to tell us is that this species is the breeding success of this species is quite low, depending with the type of vegetation characteristics that it's found. So within the forests, indigenous forests, we find that it's present within indigenous forest areas of Taita Hills. So maybe there's someone talking in the background. Maybe you can mute them.
Yeah, just a moment. I think someone is soon.
It's John Gitiri talking.
Yeah, yeah, already muted him.
Thank you, Richard. So you find this species is mainly restricted within the indigenous forest areas, and within the plantations, which are also existing within the Taita Hills, it's not present. So overall, we've seen that because of existing plantations and changes of the landscape of vegetation structure, there is overall reduction of habitat suitability for this species within that landscape. Other challenges that the species is facing because of the level that it nests, you find there's a bit of a challenge also being habitat disturbance brought about by livestock grazing and also people just collecting fodder within the ecosystem. Climate change is hypothesized as a challenge, but that's why it's in question marks. And the reason of this is that looking at the 3 fragments that this species is located, there's characteristics that they're the highest elevation compared to the other fragments within the Taita Hills. So it's only found in the 3 forest fragments that have of high elevation above 1800 meters above sea level. So there's been hypotheses which have not been yet been certified or concluded that there might be an issue there which need to be investigated further. So from this, having understood the challenges that this species is facing, one of the approaches or responses that that are being applied within that landscape is applying or doing what you're calling landscape restoration. And within this, as I said, informed by science, there is research which has been carried out within the landscape since 2010, 2012, where forest gaps were established within the plantation areas by felling 1 or 2 trees or 3 trees of exotic species and letting these gaps naturally regenerate and seeing whether these species will recolonize these forest gaps within Taita Hills. And as you can see within these photos, there was work which was pilot areas which were cleared within 2013, and in 8 years around, and the photo at the extreme right indicates how the forest gaps have regenerated over the past 8 years. And what the scientists have been able to document is that there has been usage of these forest gaps by the Taita Palis, though not yet nesting within those forest gaps, indicating that by improving this habitat quality, would help to enlarge or increase the foraging areas for the species and potentially result into improving the breeding success of the species. So as a result of that, closely now working with Kenya Forest Service and local communities within community forest associations, these forest areas were expanded, restoration areas, by clearing a bit more area of exotic plantation. And we have seen within these restoration areas, indigenous species, around 25 indigenous species of tree varieties have been able to establish themselves, though in a slow manner. And we're expecting that in the near future that this area will become much more will become more suitable areas for the Taita Palis as we continue. So research is still ongoing, and documentation and monitoring of the populations within these areas. And we see that they are now being able to utilize some of these larger gaps that have been created within the forest areas. And as a result of that, there's been now modeling that is being carried out or have been documented about trying to connect these forests using the restoration approach by connecting now the forest fragments in Taita Hills through corridors. So you can see within these areas, the brown areas are corridors which we need to be targeted for restoration with indigenous species to be able to connect this forest to potentially allow these species to move across, or stepping stones across these forest fragments within the Taita Hills. Another action that is being carried out is through securing or expanding protected area network through what you're calling like land purchase or land leases, or establishing new protected areas, and especially where these species have been documented falling within what would be termed as private land, and people and communities are willing to set aside that area for conservation purposes. So using the available science, a number of plots or private lands have been identified, and communities and landowners have been engaged towards potentially if securing that land for the Taita Palis, or also letting it through land purchase to support the establishment of a nature reserve or a forest reserve for that matter. Another action that is supporting towards conservation of this species is through policy and ensuring that we have enabling policy frameworks, where we have a Taita species action plan, working with communities through ensuring that there's sustainable management of the forests that exist, the 13 fragments within the Taita Hills, working with the Taita County government, given that forestry is a devolved function and these species are restricted within the forest. So to ensure that sustainable forest management within the county government is enshrined within their policy frameworks for them to be able to pick up this element, given that forestry is a devolved function, as well as developing and implementing what you're calling the restoration strategy for the Taita Hills, which for the past 3-4 years, there's been active restoration with indigenous species, restoring at least or approximately 60 hectares of the forest fragments, and now expanding that towards the enhancing connectivity across the 13 fragments of the Taita Hills. One key action that which needs and we have been enhancing is through is community engagement and or strengthening that engagement of community, because they are the ones who are living within or and adjacent these forests, and therefore enhancing their capacity and awareness and knowledge about this species within that landscape, and them deriving a livelihood from this forest. We believe that it contributes to a sustainable management and sustainable management of this forest, which will eventually safeguard the species that the Taita palis that we are talking about today. So as a result of this, we're working with community forest associations within that landscape who have developed management plans and implementing these actions, working with schools towards doing landscape restoration, communities enhancing their livelihood opportunities through ecotourism and birding. So now if you go to Taita Hills, you'll find a vibrant group that is there of bird guides who are able to take people around, and they're able to earn a living from this. And these are ambassadors of the species within the Taita Hills, and they will speak out and talk more and advocate for the sustainable management of their land within the Taita Hills. And with this, it helps to be able to strengthen the efforts that we're implementing within that landscape. So moving along to another landscape in another part of the country, which also hosts another very rare endemic species in Kenya. And this species is found within a very dry area of the country, moving up from the highlands of the Taita Hills to the more lowland coastal ecosystem of Kenya. And this area is characterized by very low-lying bush and interspersed with seasonal wetlands, which exist within that landscape. And this area, we call it the Dakacha woodland, which is unique, is a very unique habitat type, which is also a remnant of the Miombo type of woodland, which extends from Zambia, Zimbabwe, coming into Tanzania, and Kenya is, Dakacha woodland is the northernmost part. Those two characteristics with the Taita Hills of the northernmost part of the Eastern Arc Mountains, and the Dakacha woodland is the northernmost extent of the Miombo type of woodland within Africa, in Kenya, which extends through towards Zambia and Tanzania. So it's in the north coast part of Kenya, within Kilifi County. And this area now brings a different characteristic because this area is not protected and most of the land is falls within community land. And the reason why this place is important is because it's the only known breeding area for the endemic Clark's Weaver. So the Dakacha woodland vegetation is characteristics of this brachystegia species of trees, which are the Miombo woodland type, and also have a bit of Cenometra species, which mostly occur within the red soils within the Dakacha area. Within this, the brachystegia woodland have been documented to be the foraging areas for the Clark's Weaver, and therefore providing the food base for the Clark's Weaver during the foraging cycles. But also the landscape has these seasonal wetlands that the Clark's Weaver breed in. This was documented in 2013 because the Clark's Weaver is not a new species to Kenya or to ornithologists or to scientists. It has been documented highly within the Arabuko Sokoke, but for a number of years within monitoring cycles, people never knew where these species go, or they had never seen it breeding had never documented the species breeding. But in 2013, a group of ornithologists and scientists documented this species breeding within the wetlands in Dakacha woodland, which is northern part of Arabuko Sokoke. And following that, We have documented them breeding again in 2015, 2017, 2018, and most recently in 2024, early this year, and which were documented breeding within the Gacheru woodland. So this was documented and reported greatly within the media. And these species are unique because they only breed within the wetlands, but they forage within the woodland. So the characteristics here for maintaining and sustaining this species, we need to look at that entire landscape to ensure that we maintain the ecological qualities for this species to be able to survive without much problems. So that's how the Clark's Weaver. So these images were taken up early this year and some last year, and with that documentation and publicity for the Clark's Weaver being captured within our local dailies here in Kenya. So within the Gacheru woodland, so the extent of the woodland extends around that red line that borders that provides that characteristics of woodland. Towards the extreme right is the Indian Ocean, and the areas there where we have stars is where these species have been documented breeding, and other wetlands also within the woodland, which also have been profiled as suitable areas, but have not yet been documented. But at least around 6 wetlands have been these species have been documented breeding within the wetlands. So because of that, you find this species is facing significant threat within that landscape. As I mentioned in an earlier slide, this landscape is not protected, it's mainly community land. So security of tenure of land or quality of habitat is basically in the masses of the community. So you find then land use and land cover changes is very spontaneous and quite rapid, because of the need for people to generate, improve and get output for their land from agriculture, from grazing, from firewood, etc. And with that, we have assessed the changes within that landscape, comparing between land use cover change from 2001 and 2020. And as you can see within these two maps, there's been a significant increase in cropland area within that woodland, and therefore that is a potential risk for losing the suitable foraging areas for this species, increasing demand for water, and therefore increasing stress to the seasonal wetlands that exist within the woodland. And this is just a depiction of how the woodland crop area has increased over time, while the woodland with closed canopy has decreased between 2001 and 2020 from the assessment we have carried out. And one of the threats there is issues of illegal or not, it's not illegal, but more of an uncontrolled logging for charcoal and charcoal production to supply charcoal to places like Malindi and Mombasa and Kilifi towns. And this because of the demand for fuel wood and wood biomass, this has been one of the catalysts for destruction within that woodland. And another emerging new threat is this prospecting for land. And in Kenya, land is emotive. People are going and buying land across the country, being sold pieces of land. And because of that, you're finding there's significant rapid land use changes within that landscape, where people are buying land for prospecting, people are buying land for setting up estates, etc. And with this, you find then the woodland is significantly threatened, and therefore the survival for the Clark's Weaver is in jeopardy and might go extinct if this trend continues within the landscape. So, following similar examples that we have done in the Taita Hills, one of the tactics as we have been trying to implement is towards expanding the protected area network, because at least people are buying land. So Nature Kenya has decided also we can also buy land to establish nature reserves. And as a result of that, working with partners and financial support from different donors and partners across the world, Nature Kenya has been able to establish 2 nature reserves, and this is just a small drop within of the ocean compared to the enormity of the suitable habitat that this species requires within the Dakacha woodland. So to be able to leverage on that is also promoting or catalyzing communities towards establishing community conservation areas or conservancies, if you, for that matter, where working with local communities. For example, this Wada community, they have set aside areas around 3,500 acres of land as a community conservation area, and other community groups within that landscape, where we are trying to encourage them towards setting up sustainable land management or compatible land use practices through a conservation approach, like we have in places like in Masai Mara or Amboseli, where people are able to keep livestock but maintain the vegetation. And this would ensure that the habitat and the landscape will not change through elements of cutting wood or cutting for firewood or charcoal production in mass, or conversion of the land for agriculture. So these practices is one of the other approach that is being promoted in our landscape and seems to be working. And we are hopeful that as we continue this approach, that the community's attitudes and perception about the landscape would be able to change, and as they be able to derive incentives for and benefits from their land, economic benefit from their land. And with that, one of the things that is being done to provide those incentives is through bird touring or ecotourism, where working with the communities, we have taught quite a number of scientists, local communities to identify birds, document birds, and guide tourists within that landscape, or putting Dakacha woodland within the tourism circuit within the coastal region of Kilifi and Malindi areas of that county, as well as the world. And with that, we have seen that these incentives are bearing fruits and attracting quite interesting incentives or support, where then we have seen, like, for example, working with corporates, community classrooms have been constructed in line to the conservation of the woodland. There have been implementation of actions towards reducing firewood use and demand for fuel wood through energy-saving cook stoves, and as well as working with Kilifi County governments, developing management plans for the landscape or including it within the spatial plan as conservation areas, part of the conservation area networks within Kilifi County, or practices that are compatible with conservation of the Clark's River. Part of the incentives that are being promoted are ecotourism. Dakacha woodland is quite renowned for the Hell's Kitchen, which is quite an important tourism area, but also culturally, because the community with the Mekatilili cultural site being located within the Dakacha woodland. There's pottery keeping for the women, tree nurseries, which are supporting for the youth for restoration within on-farm, and also beekeeping as an enterprise for communities to be able to earn a living from the landscape. So enabling policy frameworks, you might have seen most recently the CS of Environment in Kenya saying that they are revoking title deeds within the wetlands. And one of the approaches that Nature Kenya is taking up is to be able to ensure that this season wetlands within the Dakacha woodland are safeguarded as breeding areas for the Clark's River. Working closely with the Kilifi County, integrating these processes within their spatial plans and their policy processes, as well as overall using these lessons to inform other efforts across the country where wetlands needs to be safeguarded for the future generation. As a result of doing this conservation effort within the Dakacha woodland, we find we are also safeguarding other species. The Sokoke pipit is also found within the landscape. The owls, the Sokoke owl is also found in the landscape. The golden rump elephant shrew. We find also other Fisher's turtle is also found within the same landscapes, and these birds using the Clark's the flagship species within that landscape, is safeguarding it for other species, including migrants like the golden oriole, which are recorded in February, and also the Eurasian roller, which also have been documented in that landscape. So you find these species help in catalyzing conservation actions, and as flagship species, that they would help other species to be conserved as well. So looking into the future, we and as members of Nature Kenya and people interested in species and conservation in general, one of the things that we need to do is monitoring these species, because for the Clark's, for example, it's still not since 2020. We had never documented it between 2020 until 2023, given that it was very dry. So we never knew where that species went. So there's need for continued monitoring for this species to be able to inform better planning, and maybe there are landscapes which are not being captured beyond the areas that we are focusing on. And for the species that are found within these local areas like the Taita Palis, monitoring that their trends of population is important, even as we are carrying out forest and landscape restoration around the forests and around the landscapes within the forests, and within the as well as enriching these forests and moving these exotic species that would need to be extracted to enhance habitat quality. And then also trying to explore other innovative tactics to safeguard these species. There are many other approaches that are coming up as science is becoming much more available and information and results are becoming much more available. We find like tactics like like carbon markets, for example, can provide an incentive for communities to maintain their land and they earn money from carbon credits by maintaining their land for the species. Community engagement and exploring additional incentives, other incentives for the communities is vital to be able to maintain this work. Advocacy and policy work is critical, because then by working with county governments and national government, will ensure the sustainability of the efforts, because then as Nature Kenya, or the efforts that we do as scientists are only important until they are mainstreamed into government processes, as well as enhancing partnerships, because this work is quite enormous. It's not one institution which can be able to solve these issues, but catalyzing these actions and building up on partnerships will be able to enhance future sustainability efforts. And then, of course, these things do cost money, and therefore mobilizing for resources, be it for land restoration, be it for generating and providing incentives for communities through different approaches like beekeeping or ecotourism, through training, etc. You find that that mix requires some resources to be able to be implemented. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say thank you. And this work has been collaborated and provided for with quite information from different people that are supporting the efforts, and we are collaborating with towards implementing these actions within the Taita Haze and Akacha woodland. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Gacheru, for that insightful presentation. I had encouraged everyone to narrow or actually channel their questions through the chat box, and I see one from Edwin Kamugisha from Nature Tanzania. Hi, Edwin. Okay, Edwin is asking, thanks, Gacheru. I would like to know how high are the nests placed in trees? I'm just wondering how livestock get to that level. This is actually the Taita Apalis case.
Thank you, Edwin. With regard to the Taita Apalis does not nest on trees. They nest on low-lying shrubs and mainly the blackened fern. And this is around a meter and a half above the ground. So you find habitat disturbance and movement of livestock or people cutting fodder. You find the nests are within reach, because the species does not nest on trees. It nests on that level of around a meter and a half from the ground. Similarly to the Clark's weaver, it also, the Clark's Weaver nests on the sedges in wetlands. They don't nest on trees. So you find the characteristics of these two species and also the the height they are nesting. At least one is a bit more sheltered because it's in a wetland, but the other is more exposed. But as for the Clark's Weaver, things becomes drier, the wetlands become areas for invasion because the cows are able to go get water. So they also become highly disturbed by disturbance as well of similar nature. So to Edwin, they're not nesting very high, they're nesting very close to the ground, maybe 1.5 meters at a maximum. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the response, Mr. Gacheru. There is, okay, Muthengi Mbuvi is asking, can we find the link for the recorded meeting for the missed session? The reason I will say yes, as we said initially when we were beginning, we are recording the presentation and we will upload it in our Nature Kenya YouTube channel, where you can always revisit. I will request our communication coordinator, who is actually with us here in the meeting, can just share our link to our YouTube channel, and then later on our participants can be able to visit. So yeah, still the floor is open now that we do not have any more question in the chat box. Maybe if you have a question to the speaker, you can raise your hand, and then we will give you an opportunity to unmute and ask the question directly. So the floor is open to anyone. Anyone with a question of the speaker? Yes, Njeru, just unmute and ask your question.
Thank you, Richard, and good afternoon, everyone.
Good
Thank
afternoon.
you, Gacheru, for the presentation. My name is Peter Njeru. My question is in relation to the culture on land. We understand that there is an indigenous community referred to as the Waadha community that lives within the culture on land, and this community has been described as endangered, being that only 2,000 of them are in Kenya. So then in the livelihood and community empowerment interventions, are there interventions that are particularly tailored to the needs of this community for them to continue also safeguarding the environment in which the Clark's Weaver might be utilizing? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Njeru, for your question. Mr. Gacheru, any response to that?
So thank you, Peter. So the Waadha community, I think historically, if just to give you a bit of a background of this community, they are generally hunter-gatherer people. So lots of the names within that landscape, like the word Arabuko, for example, and other words within that region of Kilifi County are actually Waadha dialect names or words that are used. They were communities that were mainly used by, during the very instrumental during the colonial times to guide hunters within the landscape as they went game hunting. So their practices are still, people keeping livestock and not doing what you're calling like farming per se. And one of the approaches that as captured in one of my slides is what has been for them as an incentive to set aside land as committee, as a conservation area, which then they're able to attract incentives because their practices are more of keeping livestock, and if they're able to keep livestock in this case, they require more land, a lot of land for their livestock. And therefore, if they're able to conserve those areas, as conservancies or register them as conservancies, they're able to be able to attract some level of investment as comparable to those ones in the other areas like Masai Mara and Amboseli. So yes, there are approaches that are being implemented, and one of them is through that conservancy movement, and as well as helping them to improve their breeds of livestock. And mainly these are goats, because they don't keep sheep and cows, they're mainly keeping goats for their livelihood activities. They're yet to change or behavior on issues of beekeeping, but that's something which is also adjusting with time, because then culturally they were not doing those activities. So Nature Kenya is looking at that setup of culturally related activities that we are enhancing for them to be able to conserve their landscape better. Thank you.
Thank you for that response, Mr. Gacheru. Through the chat box, Edwin Kamugisha is saying, thanks so much, Gacheru, for the response. I should plan to visit the area and see those beautiful birds. Karibu sana, Edwin. Elizabeth Jenga saying, thanks, Paul, for this very informative presentation. Welcome, Elizabeth. Simon Odhiambo, the Kenyan border. That was a wonderful presentation. Well done for the good job. Please keep it going. I strongly feel there is need to educate the communities to appreciate land that has indigenous trees, bushes, shrubs, and grasslands, rather than see these lands as idle and fallow. I agree with you, Simon. From Leon Benan, thanks for a great talk and for Nature Kenya's sustained commitment to conserving these globally important species and sites. Despite the very many challenges, with a lot of interest emerging now in nature credits worldwide, perhaps Nature Kenya with local communities can find a way to raise additional resources through that route. Thank you very much, Leon. Okay. From Millicent Wangare, since there has been an increase in the purchase of land at Dakacha and the purpose is to conserve it, is there a way that the various organizations can partner as one and make a uniform purchase so that the Dakacha woodland forest can be under a committee of several stakeholders rather than having several organizations buying it at different times? Mr. Gacheru, you have a response to that?
You said it's Millicent, I think.
Yes,
so yes,
Millicent.
that concerted effort among conservation NGOs or civil society is being done. So you find like Nature Kenya, there's other partners like in Dakacha, like Arocha Kenya, for example, and therefore there's that uniformity on the approach towards establishing nature reserves within Dakacha woodland. So the challenge here comes with regard to the accessibility, or because different institutions have access to different donors or different resource pots, if I may put like that. But the philosophy for safeguarding the landscape is agreed upon by the institutions conservation institutions within the landscape, and therefore we are forging towards the same direction without, and working with our individual partners towards buying or establishing these nature reserves. So, but you find now with time, then because of what you're calling like land adjudication and communities setting aside land being privatized in that way, so you find then an approach towards people setting us or coming together to establish conservancies is another approach that we want to encourage people that have their land there towards moving ahead to safeguard Dakacha woodland. So yeah, so there's a suite of approaches, and yes, the institutions within Dakacha conservation NGOs are working or talking to each other towards the same principle of safeguarding land. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, thank you very much, Gacheru, for answering that. There's also another question from Oystein. Does monitoring say how populations are doing? Are they declining, increasing, or too early to say?
both and not both, because so for example, the Clark's Weaver having done monitoring, which was done in 2013 after they were identified breeding within the Kacha woodland, there were estimates of around 3,000 individuals. But then you find the huge gaps, especially on and difficulties of being able to monitor this species. Last year, we were able to record around maximum 800 individuals. We have recorded around 1,500 individuals. So there's a bit of science to be done, to be explored there on how to model, to determine the population, because these species are not known where they move. Unlike the Taita palace, which is a bit more restricted, and the nest and territories, most of them have been documented. So you find, at least for the past, like let's say 5-6 years, and the Taita palace, the population has remained more or less kind of stable and not fluctuating too much. But during the drought, which we had in the past 2 or 3 years, because of incursion, we had some type of dip in population. But we find then over time, I think we'll be able to answer that. But it fluctuates, and it might be too early. But on the other hand, we might need to get better science and analysis to be able to provide that result for people.
Okay, thank you, Gacheru. Also, John Mwasharo have shared our YouTube channel, so yeah, we can use that link in all our presentations. We've already uploaded in there. So Elias Maina is from Elewana Collections. Wonderful presentation, and many thanks, Paul, for sharing. Also, I see John Gitiri said, "Keep up the good job, Paul, and entire team. Thank you very much, John Gitiri." Brian have raised his hand up. Brian, just go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Paul, for the good presentation. ICIT has pulled people from all sorts of regions. Now, I'm curious to know about the threats of the birds you've presented about, especially the Clark's Fever and the Taita Palace. Now, with regards to the nesting platform, the level, the height from the ground, livestock having been mentioned as one of the threats causing disturbance, I'm curious to know if there are also wildlife species that is now, apart from livestock, could there be also wildlife species within the habitats? Because I don't know the background of the culture per se, but I'd be happy to understand also other threats apart from livestock.
Thank you, Brian. For the Clark's Weaver, one of the largest threats today is land use, land cover changes. There's not been further research and documentation of other, what you might call like threats, like interspecies relationships, like interactions. But in the Taita Hills, there's been surveys being done within the Taita Palace nests, where they have documented dormouse and harrier hawks, invading the nest, and also snakes, because of the level of where the nests are, and snakes coming and taking eggs. But to whether this by itself is significant enough to be able to impact populations, that has not been determined yet for the Taita Palace. But the natural predators have been documented using camera traps, and therefore we do know that there are these interactions that are happening. But for us to be able to infer, to say that these are causing population decline, that has not been determined yet, because overall the main challenges we are facing is these issues of disturbance, especially in Taita Hills, of the livestock and clearing of that vegetation and forest fires. same case within similarly to what is happening within Dakacha. So interactions with other species, we don't have answers yet as to whether they are impacting populations yet for these two species.
Thank you. Thank you for the response. There is another question from Joseph Zozo. Thanks for the good presentation. I might have missed the first part of the presentation. Is there any research done concerning the birds, specifically habitat suitability, forage and nesting or breeding preferences for the said birds to inform their conservation through modeling?
So for the Taita Palis, there is more detailed research which has been carried out working with renowned scientists in the country and lots of other master students and PhD students who have carried out research. So those micro habitat characteristics are more or less known and therefore those can help in modeling. For the Clark's Weaver, given that it's a very relatively recent bird to have been documented breeding within Dakacha woodland, the habitat is preferences of foraging is known. But for the past, as we said, for the past, let's say from 2020 and 2023, we had not documented that, but we didn't document it for 3 years. So we were wondering where it has gone for the past 3 years. It's not in Arabuko, it's not in Dakacha, where is it? So is there other habitat preferences it has? That's a question we are here to answer, but it's something we need, in which needs further exploration. And these birds are very difficult to catch, even to put a transmitter. They fly above the mist nets, which has been suggested as an approach towards seeing where this bird is moving. But there's still a lot of work to be done especially for the Clark's Weaver, to understand its habitat preferences. The breeding preferences, we know it's wetlands. Habitat foraging areas, even though we are confining it to the Miombo type of woodland in Dakacha and Arabuko, but for the past 3 years, since 2020 to 2023, we didn't record it. So we didn't know where it went. Maybe the other habitats that it goes to that we have not yet been able to identify as at yet. So there is still need for that expansion. And this bird might potentially help us to have a better landscape understanding of other places within that area that we might not be aware about as at yet. Thank you, Muzozo.
Thank you, Gacheru, for that response. There's a question from Simon Obiambo, the Kenyan bird. When is the right time to visit the sites? I am interested in photographing these birds as part of my contribution to conservation efforts.
So for both or for one? So different timelines?
For both. I know Simon would be interested in both.
So for the Clark's Weaver, I think for the Clark's Weaver, we need to look and loop and maintain your vigilance in social media platforms, as we did last year when we have the Dakacha Woodland group having identified the first, nesting being documented late last year. And so you find, let's keep the vigilance, but mainly for the Clark's Weaver is when the wetlands are full and the sages and have grown. So maybe during this season, if the rain persists, potentially during this period might be a suitable period. Maybe after the rains have progressed a bit, but keep your eye on the social media platforms within Nature Kenya and also for the Dakacha Woodland group. When they record the first breeding, they do put it out as they did last year, and people flocked into Dakacha Woodland to document and take the very good images that I've shared within this presentation. For the Taita Palis, I think that's a species, it's not moving very far, so you can visit Taita anytime, engage they'll be able to show you around and you'll be able to see that bird. It breeds mainly between October through to March, and the rest of the period between March through to the October, it's not breeding. So its breeding period is between October through to March, and therefore there's a bit of heightened activity within that period. So, but generally, if you go to Taita, you'll definitely be able to see a species because the territories are well known. So it varies for the Clarks River, I would say keep an eye on the social media platforms. When the guys will see it, they will definitely alert people for them to go to visit the Dakacha woodland. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Brian Otiego says, thank you, Paul. We have exhausted all the questions that came in through the chat box, and Sese, I see, has raised up his hand. Sese, you want to ask a question? Go ahead. Joshua Sese, unmute and ask your question.
We can't hear you, Sasa, if you're talking.
Yeah.
Am I clear now?
Yes, we can now hear you.
Thank you very much for the impactful presentation that you made. From what you presented, there's something that came out clearly that the conservation community is working very hard to ensure that these birds see the next generations, especially for the Dakacha woodland. We've seen whereby the conservation communities are buying land and forming conservancies. So what exactly is the government doing? Would you be aware? Thanks.
Oh, Sese, our government, good question. I do not have an answer. But with government, in general, when they're putting up their policy frameworks, for example, in Kilifi County and Taita Taveta County, you find that they're recognizing that these species exist within their areas. And for those that are very keen, especially Taita, very keen in promoting tourism, agritourism has been identified within their their policy documents, a CIDP, for example, as a way of promoting visitation, and this is taking advantage of the Savo ecosystem. For Dakacha and Kilifi, cultural tourism is what is being aimed to be promoted by the government, but we need them. There's more work to be done. Generally, there's something being done, but as you know, with government priorities, it shifts here and there. So there's a bit of work being done in policy frameworks and setting up their policy processes, and also encouraging certain enterprises within their landscape. So it's for us now as civil society coming to mainstream these elements within their programming. So a bit of work is being done, especially in Taita, in Dakacha. Still a lot of work to be done, but we are somewhere. We cannot say they are not doing anything, but they need to do more anyway. So, but it's for our work to be able to encourage them to do more and insist through our policy and advocacy work. Thank you, Sese.
Thank you very much too. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you, Sese. Thank you. Really appreciate.
Because I was wondering, since these birds were they were recorded breeding all the way since 2013, I was imagining that maybe the government would have thought of having the Dakacha woodland becoming a protected area. But maybe
Yeah, correct.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's why in my presentation, even there's been discussions around potentially changing or adopting a new name for the Clarks River to be called Kilifi River. It has not been concluded yet, but it's trying to provide that incentive for county governments to be able to connect with these species. So at least Taita Palis is connected to Taita Taveta County. Clarks River is still very English word.
Yeah.
So if it's called Kilifi River, potentially the governor might be very proud and to be say they have their own something of their own. So that's something which is an ongoing discussion. It has not been concluded. So in the documents, and if you look at most of them, you find Clarks River being referred to as Kilifi Clarks River. So they are being used interchangeably until the conservation committees agreed on the full name, whether it moves to Kilifi River. At the moment, we still remain at Clarks River, but that will be part of the incentives to encourage county governments to do more for the species in their landscape.
Thank you, Paul, for that. I see Martin Kiama saying, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Paul, for the very informative presentation. Thank you very much, Martin. Not unless there is anyone who really have a burning question, then we can bring the session to an end. We've exhausted all the concerns, the questions, the compliments that came in through the chat box. Maybe you can pick like the last question from the audience. If you have, you can raise your hand and we give you an opportunity to ask. Anyone with a question before we end the session? Okay, so seems we are all comfortable. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time this afternoon that we've gone through all the today's presentation. And to our speaker, thank you very much, Paul Gacheru, for the insightful presentation. We really appreciate. So ladies and gentlemen, just to wish you a great afternoon and see you next time for our talk next month. We can leave at our own pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
Richard.
you,
Thank you,
bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Paul.